I don't care about your scars. I just want you to be mine.
Oh, I thought you wouldn't.
I love you always.
Once upon a time, there was a quiet, modest neighborhood in our town, Nigeria. And today, the sun had not yet climbed over the horizon when OmoLayo stepped onto the cold wooden floor of her uncle's home. The air outside was crisp, carrying the faint, comforting scent of roasted corn from the street vendors who were just beginning their day. Omalaya was a young woman of breathtaking grace, with skin like polished mahogany and eyes that held the depth of a calm ocean. She was not the type to shout for attention or demand that the world look at her. Instead, she moved like a gentle breeze, soft-spoken and kind, possessing a beauty that did not scream, but rather seeped into the souls of those patient enough to truly look at her. Omalaya's life was defined by a quiet strength born from heavy loss. Her parents had passed away when she was only a little girl, leaving her with memories that felt like fading photographs. Her uncle, Omolaja, had taken her in, and while he possessed a mountain of genuine kindness in his heart, his home was not a sanctuary of equal love. Omolaja's wife was a woman who lived with a sharp tongue and a cold gaze. She never missed an opportunity to remind Omolayo that she was just an outsider, a guest who owed her life to their charity. And every day, Omolayo was made to feel the weight of her orphaned status. And in that same house lived Omolola, the biological daughter of the family. Omolola was like a bright, burning flame, confident, loud, and draped in the finest clothes a mother could provide. She was raised with a sense of freedom and entitlement that Omolayo could only dream of. While Omolola slept late into the morning, Omolayo was already at work. Her hands, though delicate, were used to the rough texture of the broom and the heat of the stove. She swept the floors until they shone, made tea until the rich aroma filled the hallways, and prepared a breakfast fit for a king, all before anyone else had opened their eyes. She never uttered a single word of complaint. Her silence was not a sign of weakness, it was a shield, a way to keep her inner peace safe from the sharp barbs of her aunt's remark. She lived in the shadows of the house, serving with a heart that remained virtuous despite the loneliness that often sat heavy in her heart. Across the beautiful scenery of Akure City, the atmosphere was entirely different. There stood the magnificent estate of Chief Bode Roland, a man whose name was synonymous with power and wealth. The Roland family was incredibly wealthy, living in a house of polished marble and gardens that are very grand. But they were not people of vanity. No, Chief Roland was a traditional man who believed that a person's value was measured by their character and not their bank account. He had raised two sons with the same grounded values. The eldest, Bode, was already a settled man with a wife and a life of his own. Now the family's focus had turned toward the younger son, Boye. Bode Roland was a rare kind of man. Despite being the heir to a massive fortune, he carried himself with a humble, almost shy dignity. He did not spend his nights in loud clubs or indulge in the vices that many rich young men did. He did not drink or smoke. Instead, he spent his time thinking about the weight of his future. To Boye, marriage was a sacred bond, a responsibility that required a partner who understood the quiet beauty of tradition and the importance of a selfless heart. He had told his father many times that he did not want a girl who was obsessed with fashion or fame. He wanted someone simple, someone whose beauty came from within. And one morning, Chief Roland decided to visit his dear old friend, OmoLaja, whom he fondly calls Laja. The journey took him and his driver about 40 to 45 minutes. And now, Bayo and Laja sat together in Laja's shaded garden, the steam rising from their tea as they reminisced about their younger days. Then the conversation naturally drifted toward their children. Chief Roland spoke openly about his desire to find a suitable bride for his son, Boye. She has to be someone who could uphold the grace of their family name. Uncle Aja felt a surge of nervous excitement. His first thought, naturally, was of his own daughter, Omolola. He imagined her in the grand Roland estate, draped in wealth. But as he looked toward the house and saw the silhouette of OmoLayo moving quietly through the kitchen, a strange feeling of guilt and honesty washed over him. He knew Lola was free-spirited, but he also knew she was spoiled. He knew that the girl who truly embodied the virtues Chief Roland described was his niece Omolayo, who asked for nothing. She is not my own flesh and blood, Laja admitted, his voice cracking slightly with a rare moment of affection. But she is a daughter to me in every way that matters. Her name is Omolayo. You can call her Layo. Chief Roland listened intently. He was a man who looked past titles and bloodlines. He saw the way Laja's eyes softened when he spoke of Layo's goodness, and that was all the evidence he needed. He asked to meet her the following day. The next day, the air in Uncle Laja's house was thick with tension and frantic energy. Layo was confused. She saw Uncle Laja's wife, Auntie Larry, being frantic more than usual, and saw Lola, her cousin, dressed in a vibrant, expensive outfit that sparkled under the lights. Then her aunt approached her with a stern look, handing her a simple plain knee-length gown. Wear this, she commanded. Don't try to stand out, just stay in the background. Lyle did as she was told, pinning the modest dress into place. She assumed guests were coming to see Lola, and she was content to remain the girl who served the tea. Lola, meanwhile, paced the room with an irritated expression, annoyed that she had to parade herself to outsiders. Some time later, when the heavy doors opened and Chief Roland entered with Boye, the house seemed to shrink. Boye stood tall, his presence commanding yet gentle. When Lyle stepped into the living room, carrying the teapot, her hands were trembling so much the porcelain cups made a soft clinking sound. She kept her head down, her long lashes casting shadows on her cheeks. She felt the weight of many eyes on her, but there was one gaze that felt different. It felt warm, and for a split second, as she reached out to offer a cup, her eyes flickered upwards and met Boye's. In that moment, the world around them seemed to slow down to a heartbeat. There was no loud music, no dramatic flash of light, but there was a profound, quiet recognition. Boye looked at Lyo and did not just see a girl in a simple gown. He saw her flawless skin and breathtaking beauty that his father seemed to value. He saw the sensational grace in the way she moved. He noticed that she wasn't wearing heavy makeup or trying to use loud laughter to catch his eye. She was just herself. She was sensible and looked responsible. And it showed in the steady, careful way that she served his family with so much respect and joy. As everyone sat and talked, Lyle spoke well when she was asked a question. Her voice was like silk, soft and polite. She did not try to brag or impress him with false stories. She was honest and virtuous, and Boye felt a pull toward her that he had never felt for anyone else. He felt a deep spark beginning to glow in his chest, a feeling of protection and admiration. He saw a woman who would be loyal and hardworking, someone who could turn her house into a home with just her presence. After the meeting ended and the Roland family began their journey back to their province, Chief Roland turned to his son. He did not want to pressure him, but he was curious. He asked Boye what he thought of the young lady. Boye looked out the window. The image of Lyle's shy, sweet smile burned into his mind. He thought about the way she carried herself with so much dignity despite her simple clothes. He thought about the warmth in her eyes that promised a lifetime of devotion. I like her, Boye said, his voice firm and filled with a certainty that traveled deep from his soul. I like her very much. In those few words, Lyle's life of silence was about to end, and a new story of being loved and cherished was just beginning. Back inside the living room of Uncle Aja, the air felt thick, like the moments just before a massive summer storm breaks. Auntie Larry sat in the corner, her fingers nervously picking at the edge of her scarf, but her eyes were not filled with love. They were filled with a sharp, stinging jealousy. She kept thinking about her own daughter and wondered why this golden opportunity was falling into Lyle's lap instead. She worried loudly about money, whispering that they were just simple people with thin wallets. To her, the gap between their modest life and Chief Roland's massive fortune was like a giant canyon that no bridge could ever cross. She kept bringing up the dowry, her voice dripping with a fake concern that hid her inner bitterness. She couldn't understand how a girl as quiet as Lyo could attract such a powerful family, and it ate away at her heart. She wished the Rolands would later reject Lyo by saying they had realized that they were not of the same class and background. But a few days later, Chief Roland and few members brought the formal marriage proposal to Uncle Aja and made his son's intentions known. He looked at the humble surroundings and saw something much more valuable than riches. He told them clearly that he was not looking for a transaction. He was looking for a genuine soul. He wanted a daughter in law who carried goodness in her breath and kindness in her step. While the men spoke of futures and promises, Lyle stood like a shadow near the doorway, hidden by the heavy curtains. She stayed so still that she barely seemed to breathe. But inside, her body was a storm of feeling. Her heart was beating so fast and hard that she was sure the elders could hear it thumping against her ribs like a trapped bird. Marriage had always been a far-away thought, a blurry picture of a day that would come much later. She had always known that one day she would have to pack her small life into a truck and leave the only walls she had ever known. But now that the moment was here, it felt terrifyingly real. The floor beneath her feet felt unsteady. The reality of becoming a wife, of belonging to a stranger's house, stood right there on her doorstep, waiting for her to open the door. Laja, her uncle, eventually looked toward the shadows and called her name softly. His voice was full of a gentle sadness, knowing he was preparing to let her go. He beckoned her into the center of the room, where all eyes fell upon her. He explained the proposal with great care, his words slow and meaningful. Then Chief Roland did something that shocked the very air in the room. He asked her if she agreed. He asked for her opinion. In a world where Layo was used to following others and staying quiet, no one had ever asked her what she wanted. The weight of the choice pressed down on her shoulders. It was a beautiful, scary moment of freedom. She felt completely overwhelmed, her mind spinning with 1,000 images. She had only seen Boye once, a single meeting that lasted only minutes. Yet the memory of him was burned into her mind. She remembered his presence. It wasn't loud or demanding, but calm, like a deep forest. Just thinking of him made the trembling in her hand stop. There was a safety in the way he stood, a quiet strength that made Lyle feel like she would never fall if he were nearby. Very slowly, with her heart in her throat, she let her head drop in a tiny, shy nod. That one small movement changed the path of her life forever. It was the quietest sound in the room, but it echoed like a shout. Suddenly, the tension broke and turned into a whirlwind of activity. The engagement was officially fixed. The room filled with a scent of sugary sweets as family exchanged boxes of treats, their hands meeting in friendship. Dates were whispered and written down. Calendars were checked, and the elders leaned forward to place their hands onto the heads of the young ones in blessing. Amidst the joy, Lola moved toward Lyle. She did not feel the jealousy that her mother felt. Instead, her eyes were bright with genuine tears of happiness. She loved Lyle like a true sister, a bond made of shared secrets and long nights. She hugged Lyle tightly, her embrace saying all the things word could not say, that she would miss her and that she was proud of her and would always be at her side. That night, the house finally grew dark, but sleep would not come. Lyle lay on a small familiar bed, her eyes wide open and fixed on the shadows on the ceiling. Everything felt different now. The walls of her room felt like they were already starting to fade away. She tried to imagine Boye's house, a place filled with different hallways, different smell, and new faces she would have to learn to love. She wondered about the responsibilities that would soon rest on her young arms. But mostly, she wondered about Boye. She wondered if he would be patient with her mistakes. She wondered if he would speak to her with the same kindness she had seen in his eyes. A cold shiver of doubt ran through her. She wondered if she would be enough for a man like him, or if he would eventually find her too simple. Miles away in Akure, in a room filled with the quiet luxury of his own home, Boye was also staring into the darkness. He couldn't stop thinking about the girl with the lowered eyes and the shy smile. A strange, powerful excitement was bubbling up inside him, a feeling he had never known before. It was not just a physical attraction, it was a deep, soul stirring sense of duty. He felt a protective fire start to burn in his chest. He made a silent, solemn vow to the empty room that it would be a shield. He promised himself that he would never let her feel like a stranger in his home. He wanted to wrap his life around hers so tightly that she would never have to know the sting of loneliness again. He felt the weight of the promise he was making and he welcomed it. Neither Lyle nor Boye could see the future. They had no idea that their love would soon be dragged through fire and tested by the hardest trials life could throw at them. They did not know that the peace they felt now would soon be replaced by a struggle they never asked for. But in that moment, the world was simple. A promise had been made between two families, sealed with sweets and smiles. Two hearts separated by miles of road, but joined by a single yes, had begun to beat in a new rhythm. They were moving toward each other slowly, like two rivers destined to become one great, powerful sea. The official engagement party for Bode Roland and OmoLayo Oni took place at the colorfully transformed courtyard of her uncle Laja's home. Neighbors leaned over their balconies, their eyes wide as they watched singers and dancers entertain. Lyle sat in the middle of this whirlwind, looking like a princess from a forgotten fable. She wore a beautiful print gown which shimmered every time she moved. Beside her sat Boye, his presence steady and calm like a great oak tree. When the moment came to exchange the rings, Lyle reached out and her fingers began to tremble visibly. She was terrified of the future, of the crowd, and of the giant leap her life was taking. Boye felt the vibration of her skin against his. Instead of pulling away, he slid a gold band onto her finger with a touch so gentle it felt like a caress. He looked into her eyes and gave her a tiny private smile that said, I am here and I will not let you fall. Lyle felt a rush of warmth jump from her hand to her heart, and she managed to smile back, her shy joy peeking through her fear. Once the rings were set, the celebration exploded. Lyle could hear the relatives talking behind their hands, murmuring about how a girl from such a simple house had managed to climb into the lap of luxury. Some people looked at her with genuine awe, while others had eyes sharp with envy, wondering why they had not been so lucky. Lola stood back from the noise, watching her cousin. Her face was a complicated mask. She was deeply happy for Lyle, but there was also a shadow in her eyes, a quiet sadness she couldn't quite explain, perhaps knowing that their days of being inseparable girls were coming to an end. At the end of the ceremony, Boye looked at Lyle, his heart aching with a romantic pull. He wanted to reach out, pull her to him, and whisper sweet nothings to her. But the words felt like heavy stones in his throat. All he could manage was a soft promise that he would call her, and a whispered, take care, that carried the weight of 1,000 prayers. As the Roland envoy pulled away, Lyle stood in the doorway until the red tail lights vanished into the dark. She felt a sharp stabbing ache in her chest, a lonely feeling she had never known before. It was strange to miss someone she had only just met, but his absence felt like a hole in her heart. The days that followed were marked by the ringing of the phone. At first, Lyle and Boye's calls were short and stiff. Boye would ask if she had eaten, and Lyle would answer with a simple yes. He would ask about her day, and she would say it was good. They were like two people walking on thin ice, afraid to break the silence. But slowly, the ice melted. Boye began to talk about the stress of his office and the noise of the streets. Lyle grew brave enough to tell him about the wedding dress she was sewing and how she spent her afternoons teaching the neighborhood children their lessons or reading her favorite spiritual books. Boye listened to the sound of her voice like it was music. He memorized every small detail she shared, finding himself falling in love with her goodness and her simple, pure heart. He began to tease her, laughing softly when she became too formal with him, and those small moments of shared laughter became the highlights of his lonely city days. But while their hearts were growing closer, the stress at home was growing taller. The wedding plans were becoming massive. Chief Roland wanted a grand, legendary celebration, and the invitations were being printed on thick, expensive paper. Auntie Larry used this as a weapon, constantly complaining about the cost and how they would look poor next to the groom's family. Uncle Laja wanting to protect Layo's pride, began to slip away into the night to borrow money from lenders, desperate to make sure the wedding looked honorable. Layo overheard the hushed, worried voices of the adults one evening, and a dark cloud of guilt settled over her. She felt like a burden, a girl whose happiness was costing her uncle too much. Trembling with nerves, she called Boye that evening. Her voice was small and thick with unshed tears. She asked him if he was absolutely sure his family was happy with the match, confessing that she felt their different social statuses was a wall between them. There was a long ringing silence on the other end of the line. Then Boye spoke with a firm, fierce heat in his voice that made her heart stop. He told her clearly that he had chosen her and that her background and his money meant nothing to him. His words were like a shield, giving her the strength to stand tall again. As the weeks melted away, Boye's feelings turned into a deep, protective fire. He began to picture her everywhere, sitting at his table, walking through the garden, being the light in his quiet house. He missed her so much it became a physical pain. One afternoon, he couldn't take the distance anymore and drove to Owo town without warning. He walked into the house quietly and found Layo in the kitchen. She didn't see him. She was laughing freely at a joke Omolola had made, her face bright and her spirit unburdened. It was the first time Boye saw her truly happy and relaxed, and the sight of her beautiful, honest laughter stayed in his heart like a treasure. Layo felt as if the air had been sucked out of the kitchen as she looked up and her eyes met his. Her breath ceased as Boye stood still, and for a moment the world simply stopped spinning. He looked taller than she remembered, his shoulders broad and steady, wearing a simple shirt that made him look like a prince from a storybook. The silence between them was not cold. It was thick and heavy with a heat that neither of them knew how to handle. It was a slow burn of emotion, a magnetic pull that drew them toward each other without a single step being taken. Boye's eyes were now burning with an intense, quiet fire as they moved over her face. He did not speak at first. He just looked at her, memorizing the way her eyelashes cast long shadows on her cheeks and the way her lips trembled just a tiny bit. To him, she wasn't just a girl. She was his entire future, a treasure he had been granted by the stars. Lyle barely noticed as Lola left the two of them alone in the kitchen. Boye took a slow, deliberate step toward her. Each inch he moved closer felt like a lifetime. When he was finally standing in front of her, the scent of wood and rain followed him, wrapping around her like an invisible hug. With a hand that shook just slightly, showing a rare glimpse of his own nervousness, Boye reached out. He did not grab her hand. He waited, his palm open, an unspoken question in his eyes. Lola felt a surge of bravery she had never known. She placed that small, delicate hand in his large, warm hand. The moment their skin touched, it was like a spark of lightning jumped between them. It was a physical jolt that made them both catch their breath. Boye did not let go. Instead, he slowly lifted a hand toward his face, his gaze never leaving hers, pinning her to the spot with a look of pure, unshielded devotion. He bowed his head with a grace that was both royal and humble, and he pressed his lips to the back of her hand. The kiss was soft and sweet. It was more than just a gesture, it was a promise. Lyle felt the warmth of his breath against her skin and the softness of his lips, and a flush of heat spread across her face. Her knees felt weak, but the way he held her hand made her feel like she could fly. I will count every second until you are truly mine, OmoLayo, Boye whispered, his voice low and vibrating with a romantic intensity that made her heart skip 3 beats. He did not stop there. Reaching into his pocket, he pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a delicate gold chain with a single shimmery stone that looked like a drop of frozen sunlight. It was a grand romantic gesture, far more beautiful than anything she had ever owned. With a gentle touch, he moved behind her. Lion's breath came in short gasps as she felt his steady fingers brush against the back of her neck to fasten the clasp of the chain. The heat of his body behind her was overwhelming, a golden glow that made her feel safe and cherished beyond words. He turned her around to face him, his hands resting lightly on her shoulders. For a long, breathless moment, they just stood there, two souls recognizing each other in the quiet of the afternoon. The air was charged with a heavy, sweet electricity, a longing that made saying goodbye feel like a physical weight. Eventually, the sound of her uncle speaking from the living room broke the spell. Boye took a deep breath, his eyes lingering on her lips for a second too long before he gained his composure. He squeezed her hand one last time, a firm and reassuring grip. Soon, he promised, his voice thick with emotion. Lyle watched him walk away toward the door, her heart trailing after him like a shadow. As he stepped out, she touched the spot on her hand where his lips had rested, feeling the lingering warmth. It was a goodbye that felt more like a beginning, a sweet and intense promise of a love that was just starting to bloom. The day before the wedding arrived, Uncle Lada's house was filled with a frantic, buzzing energy. Aunt Larry was like a storm cloud, moving through the hallways, her face tight with a stress that she couldn't control. She was worried about every tiny detail, the flowers, the food, and the way the guests would judge them. Because she was so overwhelmed, she turned her frustration towards OmoLayo. She scolded the poor young bride-to-be for things that did not even matter, snapping at her for the way she folded a cloth or for standing in the wrong place. Layo, with a heart full of patience, did not snap back. She accepted every harsh word and every cold look with a quiet grace, moving through the house like a silent angel, trying to help everyone, even as she was being blamed. As the night fell, the house finally grew quiet. The electricity began to flicker, the light bulbs humming and blinking as if they were nervous. And in the dark corners of the storeroom, the air became dangerous. Someone had left glowing oil lamps and decorative electric lights too close to piles of expensive silk fabrics meant for the wedding. A single tiny spark, a small bit of heat that no one would ever be able to explain, jumped from a wire and landed on the soft cloth. At first, it was just a small orange glow, but within seconds, the silk began to melt and catch fire. The flames licked the walls and climbed up curtains, spreading like a hungry monster through the room. Thick black smoke began to crawl under the doors and fill the hallways, and suddenly a scream broke the night. The house erupted into a nightmare of shouting and running. Lyle was in her own bedroom, her mind still filled with thoughts of Boye when the sharp, biting smell of smoke reached her nose. She bolted outside and saw the orange glow of the fire rising from the storage area near Lola's room. And Omolola was trapped inside. Without a second of hesitation, without thinking of her own safety, Lion ran toward the heat. She saw thick blankets hanging on the lines outside. She grabbed them and dunked them into a basin of water. Covering herself in the wet, heavy fabric, she disappeared into the wall of smoke. Inside Lola's room, the world was a blur of red and grey. She found her cousin on the bed, coughing and terrified. Lyle threw the wet blanket over herself and Lola, pulling her close and dragging her toward the exit. But the fire was so angry now. A huge burning wood beam from the ceiling crashed down, blocking Lyle's path. With one final, desperate burst of strength, Lyle shoved Lola through a gap in the flames, pushing her toward the safety of the hallway. Lola stumbled out, but as Layo tried to follow, she tripped. Her long gown caught on the jagged burning wood, and in a heartbeat, the soft fabric turned into a sheet of fire that wrapped around her legs. Her screams were so loud and so full of pain that they pierced through the sound of the roaring flames echoing through the night. The neighborhood woke up in a panic. Men ran with heavy buckets of water, and someone finally managed to throw a cold, wet blanket over Layo, smothering the flames before they could reach her upper body or her face. The fire was eventually put out, leaving the house scarred and smelling of ash. But the real damage had been done to Layo. She lay on the ground, unconscious and pale, her lower body severely burned by the fire she had fought so bravely. Uncle Elijah's hands shook with a terrible fear as he lifted her small, broken body into his van to carry her to the hospital. Auntie Larry went with them, sobbing so loudly her chest hurt. Her heart was breaking with a mix of guilt and terror. She realized that the girl she had treated so poorly had just given everything to save her own daughter. Lola stood by the door, frozen like a statue, tears streaming down her face as she watched her savior being taken away. In the city, Boye was startled awake by the persistent, shrill ringing of his phone just as his father entered his room, his face as white as a sheet, his eyes filled with a grave, heavy sadness. Boye's heart dropped into his stomach before a single word was said. He was afraid to pick his own phone. He knew something was terribly wrong. When his father told him that his bride-to-be, OmoLayo, had been in a fire accident, the world seemed to tilt. The drive to the hospital was a blur of speed and silence. Boye kept remembering Layo's laugh from their earlier phone call and the way she had shyly promised to show him the beads bracelet that she had made for him. When he reached the hospital, he found Layo behind a thick glass window in the intensive care unit. She looked so small amidst the white sheets and the hum of the machines. Bandages covered the entire lower part of her body, and Boye felt like he could not breathe. The doctor spoke in low, serious voices about how bad the injuries were. They talked about how she might never walk the same way again and how the scars would take a very long time to disappear completely. In the hallways, relatives began to whisper. Some of them with cold hearts suggested that maybe the wedding should be cancelled. They whispered that a wealthy man like Boye should not have to marry a girl whose beauty was now hidden under scars. Boye heard every single word, and it made a fire of anger burn in his eyes. He stepped closer to the glass window, pressing his palm firmly against the cold surface as if he could reach through and touch Layo. He turned to the whispering crowd and spoke with a voice that was like iron. He told them that she was the exact same person he had fallen in love with. He declared that she was already his wife in his heart. He said that even if the fire had touched her face, he would still love her with all he had. But he looked at her sleeping form and noted that the heavens had been kind. Her face remained flawlessly beautiful, untouched by the smoke of flame, as radiant as ever. And inside the room, Layo slowly opened her eyes 5 days later. The pain was like 1,000 needles stabbing her skin. She couldn't move her legs, and the weight of the bandages felt like lead. Tears rolled down the sides of her face, soaking into her pillow. Her first thought wasn't about the pain of her ruined legs, it was about Boye. She was terrified that when he saw what the fire had done to her, he would look at her scars and turn away in disgust. She felt broken and unworthy. But outside that glass, Boye stood like a solid pillar of stone. He refused to leave her side, and he refused to let a single doubt enter his mind. The fire had burned her skin, but it had only served to show everyone the incredible strength of her soul. And for 2 long weeks, Boye continued to stay at the hospital. He slept in her chairs and watched over her every breath. Aunt Lere stayed too. Her heart completely changed. She took care of Layo with a mother's tenderness, weeping as she begged the girl for forgiveness for every mean thing she had ever done to her. By the 24th day, Layo was strong enough to stand. They did not have a grand, loud party with hundreds of guests. Instead, they had a simple wedding, a quiet ceremony filled with a love that was deeper than any ocean. Lyle wore a dress that covered her healing scars, but her face was glowing with a beauty that came from inside. When they were finally declared husband and wife, Boye did not look at her with pity. He looked at her with a hunger and devotion that made Lyle feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. He took her lovely face in both of his large, warm hands, tilting her head back gently before capturing her lips with ease to seal their marriage with a long, sweet kiss that told Lyle that she was safe, she was cherished, and she would never be alone again. Thank you so much for listening.